Good afternoon. I hope you guys enjoyed your spring break and this extra time that you are now at home. I know that the decision to close the campus for the remainder of the semester, it can be a little challenging and perhaps a little overwhelming. The good thing for our class is that you guys are pretty much set up with Canvas, and so that should be a huge stress reliever. You guys have already proven that you are able to time manage well, and that's really the biggest thing in regards to shifting all your classes online. So please don't worry about that. I know that there's some questions regarding what's to be expected. I hope each of you, well, I saw all but one person has responded to the announcement. If you watch this and you haven't, you need to respond. But to kind of give you guys some idea, at the time I sent the announcement out, we did not have a final determination regarding the semester. As you know, it has been closed, so everything will be online for the remainder of the semester. So how will this look for your final projects? You are still going to teach. The only difference will be is that you will teach and you will record yourself. You will be submitting that into the discussion board for your classmates to be able to do their piece of it. So we're not going to skip a beat on that. I know some of you are going, oh, daggone. But this is going to be, it's going to be fine, and you guys are going to do fabulous. So I'm not worried about that at all. And I just want to encourage you in that to continue to work forward and toward that. Also, one of the things that I had mentioned was that I had placed a discussion board for just questions in general. It is not loaded in the modules. You would actually, on the left-hand side of the Canvas, you'll see where it has discussions. You click on that, and I have pinned it to the top. So if you have any questions that you have, you can either direct them towards me or classmates to be answered. That's fine. But I feel like that's another way to promote class discussion, and other people can benefit from the answer. So please feel free to use that. In fact, I'm strongly encouraging you to do that. Yes, you will have weekly discussion boards now. That just helps to kind of keep you guys communicating with one another. And again, being a teacher is very community oriented anyway. And so having those discussions really are beneficial. And so I really want to continue to promote that. Interestingly enough, our chapter this week is Becoming an Effective Teacher. And this is definitely for many teachers who have never done online. This is a very stressful moment for them. If you have some professors that have not taught online, please show some grace and patience with them, because this really is new territory. Lucky for you guys, I actually have taught online, but I've set this class up where we've been utilizing those resources. So again, we're not going to skip a beat on that. But I just thought it was very interesting on what makes an effective teacher. And I will tell you, if some of you end up teaching on the college level, one of those aspects is being an online professor. And it is not the same as being a face-to-face. I have to tell you, if I had a preference, it would definitely be face-to-face. And we're going to talk about that as we get into some of this information. I am not going to go through this entire chapter in this one particular video, mainly because it is a very long chapter and I really don't want to go over the 15-minute mark. I think that's just way too much at any given time. So I'm going to be splitting this chapter up into two increments, so you can just kind of marinate on that. Hopefully you've watched the two videos and that you've read the article. I'm really interested on your feedback when looking at that. Again, excuse me. I want you to kind of step back, be objective when you're listening to that information. What emotions does that rise up in you? Are you in agreement? And remember, if you're in agreement with something, you do not have to be in agreement 100%. And that's, again, one of the cool things about being a teacher. We can pick and choose. We can say, man, I really like that because it fits in with our teaching style, and you can resonate with that. Others, you can say, no, not going to do that at all, and that's fine. So I am really interested in those things that really spoke to you, as well as those that you were like, this is not really something that I want to do, and that's okay. There is value when you see positives and negatives. There's just learning moments. It could be that you may not totally agree with it. You would tweak it to more fit your teaching style. Again, that is okay. But again, I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have to say on that information. So do not forget that your initial threads are due by this Wednesday, 11:59, and your 2 reply threads are due by Sunday evening. Again, always remember that it's at least two. If you have something to say on someone else's, please. That again promotes academic conversation and just really building this community of educators. And so I really want you to feel as though you can communicate and talk back and forth. Again, as a reminder, if someone asks you a question or needs clarification, please go back into your initial threads and answer questions if somebody has something for you. This is not that you just put your thread in, you go answer your two, and you never visit it again. Always go back. I always enjoy going back and reading what people had to say. But specifically, if somebody does ask you a question, you want to go ahead and do that. All right, so let's just jump on in. And I'm just looking right at the book. Effective teaching that maximizes learning for all students, and it's the essence of being a professional. And that is such a true statement. As far as maximizing learning for all students, that really gets into differentiation. You are going to have classes on differentiation as you continue on your educational journey, and there's so much that's really involved. The main takeaway on that is realizing that we all have different learning needs and how we're receiving that information. The main thing is that we as teachers need to recognize that, and that one teaching style does not fit every mold. That's again one of the reasons I like face-to-face classes, is because I'm able to look at a student and I can see, man, you are totally checked out, or I can see if you're grasping it, which is very exciting, but it helps me to really gauge what I'm doing in in that moment, into making sure that it's relevant. And honestly, as I was reading through your chapter and I was taking notes, the two words that I started this semester with is relevance and value. What you're doing, is it relevant? And does the student see value in what you're doing? And the things that they're discussing in your book this week really fall into that. And also realizing that it's not just one thing. These skills, they are constantly working together like those cogs of a clock, like my little thing on the board in our class that one day. But they're constantly working together. And I also have to stress to you, as you are growing as a teacher, you have to give yourself room to grow. I can tell you, and I've told you and shared this with you, the teacher I was 11 years ago, I'm not the same person. There's so many cringe-worthy moments of, oh, I can't believe I did that. But I learned from it. I'm still having those moments sometimes, and where I'm constantly in that reevaluation, what's working, what's not working. And I feel like if you give yourself permission to do that, it takes a lot of the stress off. Sometimes we have these really high expectations, and we have this idea in our mind of who we are as an educator, and that we have to be, we have these examples of these amazing teachers on some of these videos that we have, and how am I ever going to live up to that? You know what? That's their teaching style. And right now what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out yours. And so recognizing these things, that's really the first step. But also realizing that you're constantly going to be fine-tuning what works for you. You as an educator, you're not going to be the same as the teacher that's next door to you. What works for you may or may not work for them, and vice versa, and it's okay. All right, so a couple things, and again, we've talked about so many of these things, so a lot of it's really reiterating it. Student motivation and effective teaching. It begins with discussion and motivation. And there was a line in it, it said, it's virtually impossible to promote learning if students aren't motivated. And there's so many things that build into what motivates your students. And the first thing is getting to know who your students are. Elementary, I feel like that's, it's a little bit easier. Everything's more of an adventure. Middle school, I think you have to be a little bit more of a detective, and the same thing with high school. High school, I think, is a little easier, probably a lot more, because they're defining where they want to go, and so I can motivate them by relevance. And I can, just like what I try to do in class, because I know that each of you have a different discipline, and I try to make it relevant depending upon whatever your discipline is. But it's because I'm taking the time to get to know who you are, because it's so funny, some of the things that they're saying and some of the excuses that the kids have, it is so true. And I've heard them, and guess what? You're going to hear them as well. And so, excuse me, I do not have coronavirus. I just got clogged on my spit. So sorry about that. So again, I value, motivation, reaching students, and really a lot of that is, so important. I thought I got tickled. Intrinsic motivation and extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Those words sound familiar. As we were looking at being a teacher, we have both of those, that the value and the things that we're needing as educators. Well, guess what? Your students need it as well. And I really liked that little piece of it. The extrinsic motivation is to engage in an activity to receive some reward, where the intrinsic is an activity that they're doing it for their own sake, and that they're choosing to do that. Motivated students. And honestly, we do live for this, and it does make class. And you're going to have some years where your classes, you're going to have all these motivated kids, and it honestly spoils you. And you're like, this is why I'm teaching. And again, I thought they were right on point with those characteristics. They study more diligently, persist longer on challenging tasks, participate in learning activities, cause fewer management problems, have more positive attitudes towards school. Yes, you will have students like that, and it really is a joy. In some years, you'll have a concentration of those in your class, and that makes it awesome. Other years, you're not, and it really sometimes is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I really was. And I had that class. I had that one class that I'd had for like 4 years, and I just kind of moved up with them, and they really spoiled me. And so when you get students that, oh, now I've got to change my game a little bit, because now I need to figure out how I'm going to motivate them. And so it really is a crapshoot from year to year. And I love that motivated students are a primary source of job satisfaction. It's true, because you're doing what you love. You're able to do what you love because they are motivated. And that's so awesome. Motivation also stems from you. Do you like what you're doing? Are you excited about what you're doing? And honestly, it really does start there. We've all had those teachers that it's like they may have been doing it for a really long time. They've gotten in the habits. They don't, they're doing the same thing. You talk to students, or somebody who's graduated before you, and you're like, oh yeah, we did the exact same thing 15 years ago. My prayer for you, my hope for you is that you never get to be that person. And if your teaching is the exact same every single year, you really need to do a self-evaluation, just because it's boring for the students. It's going to be boring for you. You're not going to bring any new excitement. Again, we've talked about that so often in class. Personalizing content through real-world applications. Again, as you're getting to know your students, the older your students are, you can really speak into that. So as a high school teacher, Kenzie, I know you want to teach high school. I can talk about college. I can talk about your profession. While you guys are in college, I'm going to talk about your profession and what I do and why you need to learn what I'm learning. What does this mean for elementary and middle school? It does take a little bit more detective work, but elementary students, again, if you're coming in with the excitement and you're seeing students, if they're readers, they're going to bring books in. What interests them? If they're artists, are they drawing? What are they drawing? Same thing, with you, Josh, with art, do you see where a student gravitates towards a certain genre? You can build on that. Again, paying attention to what they're doing. Are they athletes? Do they live and breathe the sport that they are in? Again, especially with math, you can bring that in. If they like to cook, you can bring that in. So there's so many different things. Again, getting to know your students really helps you with that. Students' common complaints. I don't get it. I can't see how all of this applies to me. Why do I need to learn this? Again, I have heard all of these and multiple times through the 11 years that I've been doing this. And that was really my wake-up call. As a younger teacher, I didn't totally grasp that. I was just like, oh, what are you trying to do to get it? And part of that is true. What are you doing to help yourself try to get it? But then I had to have a wake-up call, and I'm going to be humble here, and it really wasn't, maybe not long ago, maybe a few years ago, and I really had to wake up, and I had to realize that, why do they need to know this? I'm teaching college prep classes, but I've got a kid who's going into trade. Why does he need to know English? And so that really made me start thinking about, why does he need to know English? Why does he need to know what I'm teaching him? If you're teaching psychology, if you're teaching math, again, I told you my story about that. Why do you need to learn math? Why do you need to learn algebra? Why do you need to know fractions? Everybody hates fractions. Why do I need to blah, blah, blah? Why do I need to know history? And really thinking about why. And not only thinking about why, but communicating and reiterating, because they're not always going to get it. Or when you are teaching a certain skill, saying, this is why you need to know this, because you're going to see this here. You told me that you like blah, blah, blah. That's where this comes in. That's why you're going to, and if you can make connections on that, you have got their attention, and now they're motivated to hear what you have to say. Students are going to check in and out. I know you check in and out on me. And that's just normal. I check in and out of meetings that I'm in, because if it's not completely relevant, if I don't see the relevance in it, it is a natural instinct. And so we kind of have to work harder on that, but also being respectful of it as well. A lot of times, like if people are checked out and you're in your own world, I'm not going to totally say anything about it. But I do have to make mention every now and again, being present is not just you physically being in the chair. You have to actually mentally be there as well. And you are responsible for what we're talking about. Relevance, again, as we're talking in the chapter. When they were talking about lecture styles and, are you making your lectures engaging? If you're not making it relevant and engaging, they're going to check out on you. So, and also when it talks about assessments, do your assessments reflect what you've talked about in class, the reading that they've done? And I try really hard to do that. That's why I'm saying, if I say it, it's probably going to be game for a quiz or a test, mainly because I'm filling it out with other things and hopefully making it relatable to you. I thought they did a really great job on really kind of breaking everything down. Promoting student success. That is so important. And also where it was talking this week about raising that bar. Should you have high expectations in your class? Yes. But should they be achievable? Yes. And this, I think, is where some teachers really miss the boat. And you'll come across them. I've come across them where they think, oh, my class is so hard, it's hard to get an A, or I do this. And it's almost like they take the pat on the back because they're thinking, oh, I'm challenging them. But if they're not teaching to the material, if they're not developing it where there's understanding of the material, where they're walking away with some value, then were they successful? And so we do want success, but at what cost? Do you want it to be so easy? Yeah, everybody gets an A, but did they really learn anything? Did they walk away from your class knowing something better than when they came in? How have you helped to develop and create who they are? Maybe open a perspective or a like of something that maybe they didn't otherwise like. And so that is so important that, yes, we want student success, but there has to be a balance. Again, as you are creating your lesson plans, as you are going into the teaching field, you do have to look at the students. When you're assessing, and you're going to have a huge class on assessments, so I'm not going to go into that, but I have to tell you, please pay attention to that, because your assessments have to be age appropriate. How you're wording it, how you're formatting it is so very important. If a student does not think that they have a chance, they're not going to try. And if that becomes your classroom situation or what you're seeing, then we're doing something wrong. And so that's where we need to really reevaluate. They got to know they have a fighting chance. If they work hard enough, they're going to be successful in your class. If they do this and they've seen, oh, wow, when I do my homework, I actually do better. I had a student actually in one of my college classes, and it wasn't until the second half of the semester that she realized that, wow, what Professor Water teaches, she actually assesses on what she taught that week. Go figure. Yes, because I'm trying to set you up for success for the assessment I'm getting ready to give you. And we've all had those teachers that you don't know how to study for their tests. College is a little bit different because there's so much that you have to do on your own. But when you are in an elementary, middle, and high school, you really have to make sure that you are covering that material appropriately. Are you gauging what's going on in the classroom? A lot of these concepts really overlap, so it's going to seem like it's jumping around, but but it really all goes together. So when you're looking at your class and you're teaching a concept, when they're talking about those informal and formal assessments, well, the informal assessment is you're asking questions. Are they answering your questions? Do they understand? If you play the game, if it's a math, I even had where I would do tic-tac-toe on the board, and with English, and you can do it. I can share, that at a different time. I can tell that you know the words, or I can tell you understand the concepts. So that to me says, okay, we're ready to move on. But during the classroom discussions, if you really, and you can really tell if people are just not getting it, are you continuing to move forward, or are you stopping to make sure that they are understanding and they're receiving value from that? Your formal assessments, you can't get away from them. Honestly, as teachers, we have to do that. What that looks like at each age is different. I'm not going to give an elementary student a 5-page paper. Heck, I'm not even going to give them, I made 1 page. I'm just concerned, can you write a paragraph for me? Now, depending upon where they are in elementary, usually like 4th and 5th grade, we're teaching essay writing, but it's a basic essay of 5 paragraphs. Intro, 3 supporting paragraphs, and 1 conclusion. And if they're writing it out, that's probably 2 pages of written work. And that's okay, because in elementary, I'm focused on content. If I'm doing math, I'm not going to give them algebra for the sake of, oh, look, I can give algebra. That's actually one of my pet peeves, of making sure that all 8th graders have Algebra 1, when some students are clearly not ready for Algebra 1. They need 8th grade math, which is to prepare you for algebra. And so are we doing things for the sake of saying, oh, well, I do this and I'm blah, blah, blah. But if you're not doing it at the time that they're ready to receive it, you missed the boat. And unfortunately, there are a lot of educators that are like that. So Liv, I know you're going into administration. You need to think about that, and really discussing with your teachers, what is age appropriate for what we're doing. Yes, are we challenging them? Yes, that's great. But if we are noticing that the majority of the class is really not getting it, we're seeing a frustration, we're seeing children that are shutting down, because usually when things get difficult, they start shutting down, then that's very telling, and you cannot ignore that. So just to be mindful of that. Definitely the things that you want to know, anything that is bolded, you need to know. Questions, when they were talking about question with classroom engagement, and they're talking about open-ended questions and wait times and things of that nature. Yes, there is a wait time, and I got kind of tickled because they're like, oh, it's usually like a minute. There are some kids that have the skill of waiting out a teacher, and I have fallen for it also, because we get, oh, I've got to do today, and so I'm asking these questions, and if they're not on my time clock, I have fallen into answering the question because nobody answered. And as I've gotten older and I've taught longer, that's why I'll say, dude, I got all day, I can wait you out. And because they know, and they have actually been trained, that if they wait long enough, someone's going to give them the answer. Well, if they realize it doesn't work for you, then they're like, oh, okay, I guess I am. The cool thing about that is if you can get one student to respond to an open-ended question, then you're going to see more class participation. It's just like with anything. If one person does it, the first time it goes, oh, okay, now we can do it. Things that fill into that. Are we promoting a class that promotes class discussion? And again, we got to get out of our own way, especially if we're on a time clock kind of deal, because, and again, I'm a direct person, so I have to be very careful. If I'm saying, oh, that's not correct. Well, there are some teachers, that's just wrong, or it embarrasses the child. We have to be very careful. Are there going to be times where you've embarrassed a child? Yes. Okay. It just happens. You don't mean to. The big thing is to apologize and make it right. And really, I'm really sorry I did that. I didn't mean to do that. Because we have got to promote a safe environment that they are able to share. And also holding kids accountable, that when someone is answering, you will be respectful, because you want someone to be respectful when you're speaking, and that there is a consequence if you're not. And that's really important to promote that environment of class discussion. So one of the couple things, some kids, they wait it out. A lot of times kids do not answer is they're afraid to be wrong. I mean, we had this discussion in class. So how do you answer that question if a student has the wrong answer? Couple things that I say, you're on the road to success. Can you fill it out? It could be that you're asking a different question. Let me rephrase that. So if I rephrased it to this, what would you say? And so sometimes it's just a matter of, again, promoting that conversation and that back and forth. If it is completely incorrect, so like if it's comprehension, it really is yes or no, this is the answer or not. No, but let me tell you why. And then do you understand why it's that way? And so again, it's how we're answering them because we do need for them to feel comfortable. If you can't get class discussion, it's going to be very difficult. Another thing that's important is your classroom management. If you don't have effective classroom management, then what happens in these discussion times, it becomes pandemonium, just craziness. It's awful. And so you don't want to fall in that because then there's no order. They're not being respectful anyway. So again, we're talking about setting up those classroom rules and expectations. And so when you're able to do this, it is in a more controlled environment. Not that sometimes that people aren't going to get off on tangents. Y'all know I do. But again, bringing it back around and saying, okay, guys, we got to bring it in. We got to keep going. Depending upon where you are and what grade level will depend upon how you are to bring that back in. I'm going to just tell you, yelling at your students will never work. Know it, because I'm a loud person. People think I'm yelling and I'm not. I'm just loud. But if I am angry, and I can tell you will shut down a whole class if you yell at them. And so really, what could you do in order to facilitate that? Yelling does not equate respect. It just is yelling, and then you just shut some students down. Again, there are going to be some times, there are going to be some students that are going to pluck your last nerve. And we're human. So if it does happen, one, you got to forgive yourself, make it right, because it's probably going to happen. But really processing through when you are frustrated, if you're getting that frustration because they're not listening, you are going to have years where you got a lot of talkers in your room. How can you work through that? How can you best communicate that to them? So that's very important as well. I've got so many notes in my margins. Using examples that, again, are engaging, things to say, like I did that, but dialogue is key. And also during those classroom discussions, if you can have an open dialogue where they can ask questions and they realize it's in a safe place, and they also realize that other kids had the same question, it's almost like this floodgate, and you will see where kids are going to communicate with you more, I don't really understand, Mrs. Waters. Could you do that again? If they don't understand, then do it again. And so there are some times where I've explained and I'll change how I say it. And sometimes I'll just open it up. Is there someone maybe can explain this a little bit better than I can? Just depends on your classroom, because you're going to have some kids, and it's usually those kids are like, oh, you've explained it. Of course we get it. Why can't you get it? And we got to really be careful with that, because you're going to have some students that honestly will get it before you even explain it. And it's frustrating for them if somebody cannot. Again, those are just really sticky waters, and just being calm and being supportive and walking through that with them. Challenges times success equals motivation to learn. And again, we just talked about that, making sure that we have challenging. We're not just doing the same thing. If you are on the same math chapter for 9 weeks, that's a problem. I can only say that because I knew some people that were like that, and they maybe got through 3 chapters of math in a whole year. What it does is it creates boredom. You're not challenging your students. Then they're going to start shutting down, and then that whole thing, well, nobody's doing well, and then you feel like you have to do it because you don't think anybody's getting it. It's this horrible circle. Again, gauging your class, but if you're making things engaging, if you're doing those little assessments within class, you can really gauge to see if they're getting it and move on. Don't park on something if people are getting it. Continue on. Talks about involvement. Planning for effective teaching. There were some things that it was, and this is on page 359, planning for effective teaching, planning carefully, and that is so key. Do not ever walk into a classroom cold. You should know what you are going to be doing for a lot of reasons. One, especially like in elementary classrooms, you have so many different subjects and you're transitioning. You need to think about how you are transitioning from one subject to the next. Because if you have a lot of gap time, that means they're going to fill it. And you want to make sure that you are in control of that momentum and that you are controlling that environment where they know, okay, we're on the next thing. Organization is key. Knowing what you're going to say. Do you have enough information or enough stuff that's going to fill up this time? Especially in elementary classrooms, because you really do have to time manage. A lot of times we have our schedule, I had on the board, or I had something that had from 9 this is what we're going to do. I teach English. I taught different disciplines within the whole English. So I had time for lit, for writing, for grammar. I actually had to build in grammar. So I had to make sure that I was utilizing my time effectively and that I wasn't doing so much top heavy in this subject or this area that I missed something else. And so being prepared, knowing what you're going to do, walking into it. Not to say sometimes, I'm always an over preparer, but just be really mindful of that. I know that I'm on 30 minutes. Sorry, I just want to kind of get through this. So the first, you're plan your lessons carefully. Second, help relieve the anxiety and inevitability that comes with initial teaching efforts. When we're sure of what we're doing, we behave differently. Our students can sense the difference. This actually was in one of those videos from this week where the one teacher was like, well, I don't know it, so I'm going to tell them I don't know it. I really was curious about what you thought about that. Do I feel like, should we come in with the know-it-all attitude? No. In fact, I think that that's counterproductive and it will backfire on you. But if you don't know your topic, and be very careful with how you are phrasing that. If I'm bringing up history things, I'll tell them I'm not a history major. It is my understanding. Is someone more of a history buff in this time period? Can you fill that out for me? And I've done that before, and that's okay. But be very careful with really not admitting, I don't know that. If you come in and you really don't know it, which means you didn't do your homework. Remember, when we're teaching, we're doing their homework before they're getting it to ensure that we're teaching it correctly. I've had some students that have had teachers, especially like in math, and they're like, everything she did was wrong. We saw the video where she had taught a whole lesson wrong, and then she had to come back and I thought she handled it beautifully. Just be very careful, but I was curious to see what you guys had thought about that. Careful planning helps reduce classroom management problems. Again, if you have your schedule and you're sticking to it, you know how to transition from one area to another. You get in certain habits, and that's going to begin at the beginning of the year. They're used to it. You will find that you will spend less time in transition and more time on content, and that's very, very important. They talk about state standards. We've talked about that, which I'm going to be coming back to when we're doing lesson plans. So I'm going to move on from there. Planning for your assessments. We've already talked about that. Making them appropriate. Student suggestions that they would study as hard if they weren't assessed is not supported by research. I have to tell you, and I think that you know this as well. If you don't have an assessment, are you really going to read? Because honestly, that is what students are looking at. If you're not going to hold me accountable to this, then why should I read it? That's another reason why you have like pop quizzes and stuff like that. So, or, you're having a test or you're having a paper, you're going to see this, blah, 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 because then they know, oh, I need to be engaged with that. They will tell you anything. There are some students that could be their content area and they actually love it. And you know what? They probably will read and do, even if they weren't assessed. Statistically speaking, that's not a huge percentage. So I just thought that was funny, and I got a tickle out of that. Another thing that, especially for planning for assessments and when we're assessing, what came to mind was absenteeism. And that's where I had to really, especially with my older students, if you're teaching seniors, Kenzie, especially if they see the light at the end of the tunnel, it is very difficult. And that's why I make sure that they realize that class is very important and that you are responsible for what I talk about in lecture, and it's not always going to be in the book. So that makes them come, and they also know that I am going over their writing assignments, and they've seen the value of why they're in class, and so I have better attendance than most teachers because they know that I'm going over whatever it is. And I hope that you guys see that. I hope that you know that. I hope that you see that as a true statement. But if you have a child that is absent a lot, and I actually had a student on a test, well, I didn't know anything on that test. Why? Well, I wasn't here. And I'm like, okay, that really is not my problem. I went over it. I was here. And so she was absent all the time. It was a senior. And it was almost like she was accusing me for her not knowing the material, but she never showed up to school. And so if you have a student that has absentee issues, you really need to counsel with that student. And a lot of times their grades will reflect it. You will have some students, though, that if they don't show up, they're just really good students and they're going to make it up. But if you have a student that their grades are suffering because of it, that is a counsel moment, and you may end up having to have a parent conference. Instructional alignment, again, making your things relevant. I really like a lot of these tables. Essential teaching skills. Oh, that's on page 363. You want to know that for multiple reasons. When you are going to have classroom observations from your principals, and this is on that, and they're checking each one of these areas. And so you do need to be mindful of that when you are creating your lesson plans, your organization, your focus. Did you review your questioning? What are the students doing while you're teaching? Are they paying attention? That kind of thing. And so that's very important, not just for knowing this for an assessment or for as you're creating your final project, but you will need to know this in the actual field because you're going to be assessed on it in classroom observations, which goes in your folder, by the way, in your employee record. Let me see, expectations, caring, high expectations. People tend to rise to the expectations of others. Again, just kind of going over that. Yes, you should expect, but again, making those expectations where they are achievable. If you make them unattainable, it's going to really go nowhere. Modeling. Are you modeling the behavior that you would like to receive? If you are a teacher that is absent a lot, you are modeling that you don't care to come to class and that a substitute is always there. And if you are modeling that that's not an important thing, then you cannot expect that of your students. If you come to class and you are not prepared and you don't know the material, then and they know that, how can you make that expectation on them? When you're teaching, you're modeling how they're reading, how they're doing math, how they are critically thinking through the science process. You're modeling skill if it's in the art classroom. Technology, you're modeling behaviors. You're modeling professionalism. You're modeling respect. You're modeling so many different things. They are watching you, and it is very important. So that really bleeds over into so many different things. Who are you as an educator? And also a lot of these things are going to be going into your educational philosophy. How are you engaging? What is your approach to teaching and that kind of thing? So definitely read through that. Equitable distribution, prompting, that's kind of through the question. I think a lot of this is common sense and a lot of this stuff that we have talked about. Wait time, we talked about that. Feedback. All right, you got to listen to your students too. And sometimes they may say things that you may not want to hear, but you kind of need to hear. If, there are some students that, I think it was my daughter, and the Bible teacher got in her face with something on them, because she didn't follow instructions, and or she didn't hear something, don't answer this out loud, and Grace answered it out loud, and she kind of made an example of Grace and embarrassed her. And one of the other students was like, well, she didn't know because you didn't say keep it to yourself. We need to hear sometimes. And then again, should she probably handle that differently? Yes. Do I believe that? Unfortunately, I do believe that happened because I've seen other teachers do that in the past, and they just kind of get in students' faces, and you didn't follow instructions. And sometimes you have to wonder, is it the student's frustration or is it your frustration about whatever is going on in your life? And you have to be really careful with that. But feedback, how are they feedback? That's also understanding of material and all that good stuff. So that's basically, wow, that's 40 minutes on your video. I'm so sorry about that. But it was a lot of material. We've talked about a lot of this before. As you're moving forward, as you're creating your lesson plans for your final project, I am going to have all of that information written out for you, so you'll have that. So this fits into that. How are you going to instruct? How are you modeling? How, where's your energy? Where's your motivation? How are you going to engage us in whatever it is that you're doing? And it does not matter if it's elementary, middle, high school, if it's technology or art or whatever it is. You need to think of these things. So I'm going to come back on Thursday, or you'll have another one to kind of finish out the chapter. Again, if you have any questions, will you please post them to the discussion board that's pinned in the discussions? It's not in the module, it's pinned in the discussions. And so we can really open that up. If you need any clarification, that's a great place to do it. And I can answer, and again, answer on benefit of the whole class. So guys, have a great day, and I will see you on Thursday.